Asterix and Cleopatra. Our story takes place 2,000 years ago, in 50 BC. Gaul, the country we now know as France, was occupied by the Romans, whose famous commander Julius Caesar had entirely crushed the Gaulish resistance. Or had he? Well, not entirely. Out in Armorica, the part called Brittany today, one small village of indomitable Gauls held out against the invader. The greatest hero in that village was called Asterix. When we say great, we don't mean large. Asterix was rather small and weedy to look at, but he was cunning and brave. He was always going off on dangerous missions, and he used to take his friend Obelix along. Now, Obelix really was large. His job was making and delivering menhirs, and you had to be big for that, because a menhir was an enormous standing stone. You can still see menhirs in Brittany today. Nobody knows just what they were for, but the Gauls liked them. Not only was Obelix tall, he was, well, nobody called him fat in his hearing, so let's just say he was nicely rounded. He might not be very bright, but he was good-natured and always ready to help Asterix, especially if there was going to be plenty of fighting, and his favourite food, wild boar. Then there was Getafix, the venerable village druid. He knew the recipe for some very clever potions. The best was one which gave anyone who drank it superhuman strength for a limited period of time. When the effects wore off, the villagers were back to normal, except for Obelix, who had fallen into a cauldron full of the stuff as a baby, so the effect on him was permanent. Nobody knew just what Getafix put in the magic potion. All he would say was that there was mistletoe and lobster in it. The lobster was optional, but it improved the flavour. Cacophonix was the village bard. Every Gaulish village had one. It was the bard's job to sing and play the lyre. It has to be admitted that Cacophonix sang out of tune and played the lyre very badly, but he was a good sort if you could put up with his music. Fully automatics, the village blacksmith, couldn't. Finally, there was the village chief, Vital Statistics, who was majestic, brave, and hot-tempered, and according to Gaulish custom had to be carried round on a shield by two porters. They sometimes let him down heavily, much to his annoyance, but on the whole, the villagers all got on very well, and so long as Getafix kept brewing magic potion, and Asterix and Obelix kept fighting Romans, Julius Caesar stood no chance of going down in history as the conqueror of all Gaul. It was really galling for him. Just now, however, Julius Caesar was many miles away from Gaul, in Alexandria, the capital of Egypt. The Romans intended to conquer the whole known world of their time, plus any extra bits that might get discovered later, and they had added Egypt to the Roman Empire 20 years earlier. Although the Romans had all the real power, they let the Egyptian rulers stay on for the look of the thing. So the present official ruler of Egypt was Queen Cleopatra, and Julius Caesar was madly in love with her. Even a famous general had his weak spots. Cleopatra was certainly very beautiful. Caesar couldn't decide what fascinated him most: her slim figure, her shining black hair, or perhaps her nose. Yes, he sometimes thought it was her nose. You might have thought it a bit too long, a little too pointed. But as someone said later, if Cleopatra's nose had been shorter, it would have changed the course of history. Julius Caesar thought Cleopatra's nose was just right. However, Cleopatra also had a fiery temper. As our story begins, she was pacing furiously up and down the magnificent banqueting room where she and Caesar were having dinner. Julius Caesar actually dared to point out the obvious. "You have to face facts, O Queen," he told her. "Yours is a decadent nation, only fit to live in semi-slavery under the Romans." "That's an infamous suggestion, O Caesar," snapped Cleopatra. "My people built the pyramids," she told him. "They built the Tower of Pharos." The Tower of Pharos was an early kind of lighthouse. "They built the famous ancient Egyptian temples. And ancient is the word," Caesar reminded her. "All that's old hat. They don't do anything now but wait for the annual flooding of the Nile so they can grow a few crops." Knowing he could be right made Cleopatra angrier than ever. "That will do," she shouted. Sweeping an Egyptian vase off the table where it stood, it crashed to the floor in pieces. Seething with anger, she thought of a way to prove that Caesar was wrong. "Cleopatra will show you that my people are as brilliant as ever," she told him. "In only 3 months' time I'll have a magnificent palace built here for you in Alexandria." Caesar rose to his feet. "Well, if you can do that, O Queen, I'll admit that the Egyptians are still a great nation, he said. But frankly, I have my doubts. And he strolled away up a handsome flight of marble steps, leaving Cleopatra seething with rage, and rather too close to a second vase for its comfort. Sure enough, as Caesar left, he heard another mighty crash behind him. She's a nice girl, he murmured to himself. Only her nose is so easily put out of joint. Pretty nose, too. Smashing that second vase had made Cleopatra feel better. She sat down on her green marble throne, rested her feet on her pet leopard's furry back, and did some hard thinking. 3 months. That wasn't long. She had to get moving and fast. First, she must summon an architect. A little later, a short, stout little man, in a white tunic and striped headdress, was kneeling before the Queen, wondering what she wanted. He soon found out. "Come here, Edifis," said Queen Cleopatra. Edifis was the little man's name. When the ancient Egyptians talked to each other, by the way, they used picture language, called hieroglyphics. It isn't easy to do picture language on an audio tape, so we've translated their conversations for your benefit. "Edifis," continued the Queen, "I have summoned you because ye are the best architect in Alexandria," which isn't saying much, she added gloomily. "Oh," said Edifis faintly. "Don't answer back," snapped the Queen. "Your buildings are flimsy, people can hear every word the neighbours say, the ceilings are always falling in." She was beginning to get nasty feelings Caesar might be right after all. "It's these modern materials," Edifis explained. "Actually, my real ambition is to build pyramids." It had occurred to him that this interview with the Queen might be his big chance. "Silence," said the Queen. "Right, Edifis, you have just 3 months to make good. I want you to build Julius Caesar a magnificent palace here in Alexandria." "Did you say 3 months?" squeaked the unfortunate architect. "If you succeed," Cleopatra went on, "I will cover you with gold. If you don't, you'll be thrown to the crocodiles. It's entirely up to you. You may go." 3 months, thought Edifis in horror as he left the palace. "I'd need supernatural powers to do that. I'd need the help of someone who can work magic." And then he had a brainwave. "Got it," he exclaimed. "I know the very man. He can work magic." He'd remembered an old friend who lived in a little village in Gaul. Sure enough, far away in that little village in Gaul, Asterix and the druid Getafix were sitting by a roaring fire on a cold winter's day throwing dice. Life was fairly peaceful in the little Gaulish village just now. With Julius Caesar away in Egypt, the garrisons in the local fortified camps of Compendium, Tatorum, Laudanum and Aquarium felt they could take a holiday from besieging the village and unsuccessfully trying to capture the villagers. Meanwhile, the Gauls could enjoy their favourite sport of catching, roasting, and especially eating wild boar. Obelix had something else to occupy him too. He'd adopted a little white dog called Dogmatix. Some time after Edifis the Egyptian architect had his brainwave, Asterix came back from hunting with a huge boar slung over his shoulder, and found Obelix outside his house in the snow, with a large menhir on his back, patting the dog. "I'm going to train little Dogmatix to carry menhirs," he exclaimed. Dogmatix was only a fraction of the menhir's size, but the Gauls knew nothing was impossible, or not if you were under the influence of a magic potion. So all Asterix said was, "Oh, yeah. Meanwhile, why don't you lay the table while I cook us this nice big boar for dinner?" Obelix liked the sound of that, and put off the training session till later. But they were about to have company. In another part of the village, a couple of men chopping wood looked round, saw a stranger wearing an exotic leopard-skin cloak and an Egyptian headdress. "Could you tell me where to find Getafix the Druid, please?" asked the stranger politely. One of the villagers pointed to a ladder beside a tree. "Up there, picking mistletoe," he said. "Getafix!" shouted Edifis, the architect, looking up. "Why, if it isn't Edifis from Egypt!" cried Getafix from the branches. He hurried down his ladder. "What a delightful surprise!" The two old friends shook hands warmly. "My dear old Getafix, I hope I find you well," said Edifis. "An Alexandrine," Getafix explained to the villagers. "He's from Alexandria, you see." They didn't really, but Getafix was already on his way to introduce his friend to Asterix and Obelix. "Meet my friend Edifis from Alexandria," said the Druid, walking into Asterix's house. "He's an architect. I got to know him on my travels." "Any friend of Getafix is a friend of mine," said the hospitable Asterix, who was just dishing up the roast boar. "Have some dinner with us. The wild boar's done to a turn. We'd really like you to share it, wouldn't we, Obelix? I suppose so, said Obelix without much conviction. If the boar will go round. But the Egyptian architect had something more urgent than roast boar on his mind. Warming his hands by the blazing fire, he told the druid, Getafix, I've come all this way because I need your help. I have to build Caesar a palace within 3 months. If I don't, Queen Cleopatra will throw me to the crocodiles. Edifis began to sniffle miserably. And unless you use your magic powers to help me, I'll never do it, he finished, bursting into sobs. Don't worry, Edifis, said Getafix, patting his old friend on the shoulder. It so happens I wanted to go to Alexandria to look a few things up in the famous library there. This is a good chance to kill 2 crocodiles with 1 stone. I'll go back to Egypt with you. Us too, shouted Asterix and Obelix. By Osiris, will you really? Gasped the grateful architect. Woof, woof, Dogmatics agreed, and they all sat down to feast on roast boar. Edifis felt better after dinner, now that he knew Getafix and the others would help him solve his problems. My ship is waiting offshore, he told them. Just give us time to pack and say goodbye, said Getafix, and we'll be with you. Little Dogmatics was tucking into an enormous bone under the table. Obelix picked him up and patted him. Come along, Dogmatics. We're going on a nice sea voyage, he told the dog. You're never going to take him, are you? Said Asterix. Obelix took offence. And why not, may I ask, Mr. Asterix? Because he's too small for such a long journey, that's why not, Mr. Obelix, Asterix pointed out. What's more, there are cats in Egypt, he added. They'd fight like, like cat and dog. No, not another word. You go and pack. It's always the same, grumbled Obelix. I'm just an extra, a make-weight. No one ever listens to me. Soon the 3 friends were ready to leave the snowbound village. Chief Vital Statistics stood on his shield, held aloft by his 2 shivering porters, and delivered a speech of farewell. You, my friends, will represent the spirit of Gaul on the banks of the Nile, he told the 3 Gauls. Show yourselves true-born Gauls by Tutatis, he added. Tutatis was the chief god of the Gauls. And may the sky never fall on your heads. As the 3 Gauls walked down to the seashore, there was a sudden woof from the bundle of luggage Obelix was carrying. Asterix looked round in surprise. Just me barking, said Obelix hastily. I can bark, can't I? Even if I'm not allowed a say in our plans. Asterix sighed. He could never keep up a quarrel with his best friend for long. All right, you win, you pig-headed great idiot, he said. Let the poor little dog out of there. There's my ship, the Nasty Upset, said Edifis, pointing. The Egyptian vessel was anchored offshore with her sail furled, while 2 crew members waited on the beach. Soon they were being rowed out to her. Well, set his back up. We can cast off in a minute, the architect told the ship's captain. As Obelix clambered up the rope ladder to the deck of the Egyptian ship, he tried to explain how the dog came to be in his luggage. Honestly, Asterix, I swear I don't know how he got into my bag. No, of course not, said Asterix indulgently. Hurry up or we'll miss the tide. Next moment the captain was shouting something very picturesque to his crew in hieroglyphics, and with an icy winter wind behind them, the Gauls set sail for Egypt and the fabulous Queen Cleopatra. On the way, reclining in the comfortable cabin, they discussed their plan of action. Back in Egypt, Edifis explained, we'll have to face labour troubles, the time factor, because 3 months isn't long, the Romans who don't want us to win Cleopatra's bet, and above all, we'll have to deal with my rival, the architect Edifis. He's always got it in for me. He has a lot of talents. Asterix sat up in some alarm. This man, Edifis, clever, is he? He inquired. No, just rich. He has lots of gold talents, explained Edifis gloomily. That's the money we use in Egypt. And then there's always the risk of pirates on the way, he said. But Asterix wasn't worried about that. When the Gauls put to sea, they nearly always came across the same pirate crew. The Gauls enjoyed these meetings. The pirates didn't. Oh, we'll take care of them, he said. Right, Obelix? And sure enough, Not far away, his old friends the pirates were cruising cautiously in the same waters. The pirate captain was standing by the mainmast as he addressed his crew. "Right, boys, we're steering clear of all Gauls this time," he told them, "and avoid Roman and Phoenician vessels too. The Gauls sometimes use those. I'm playing safe this time. I had to leave my son Eric's on deposit to buy this ship after the Gauls wrecked me last one." There was a cheery cry from the lookout up in the crow's nest at the top of the pirate ship's mast. "Next instalment coming up any minute, sir. Egyptian ship to starboard." "Splendid," said the pirate captain, rubbing his hands with glee. "We'll make our fortunes. We'll do it yet. Get ready to board her, me hearties." On board the Nasty Upset, some interesting picture language came drifting down from the Egyptian lookout. It included, among other things, a skull and crossbones. "What's the lookout say?" asked Asterix. "He says there's a pirate ship to port," said Edifis. Obelix was delighted. "Honest? You're not joking?" he asked. "It's them, Asterix. It's our dear old friends. You, coming over?" He hailed the pirates. Hearing that familiar Gaulish voice, the horrified pirate captain could hardly believe his ears. "It isn't true," he gasped. "It can't be true. But it is. It's them. Get out of here fast," he told his men. "Quick! Scuttle!" But the Egyptian ship was swiftly catching up with the pirates. "Too late, Captain," the pirate lookout called down. "They're scuttling faster." No, scuttle our own ship, I mean," yelled the captain. He was already staving in the deck with an axe. "Saves us a few knocks, and it comes to the same thing in the end." Sure enough, soon afterwards he and his first mate, who had a wooden leg and a classical education, were clinging to a bit of wreckage as the ship went down. "Well, you said we'd do it, and here we are, done," said the first mate with gloomy satisfaction. "Alia jacta est," he added, quoting something Caesar once said when crossing the Rubicon. It meant the die is cast, but the pirate captain was in no mood for learned quotations. "One more classical remark out of you, and I'll make you eat your wooden leg," he snarled. Obelix was really annoyed to see the pirate ship sink before the Gauls even reached it. "Offside!" he yelled over the waves. "Foul! Unsporting!" Edifis was astonished. "That's amazing," he said to Asterix. "Those pirates took one look at you and sank their own ship rather than fight." "Oh, we're old friends. We've done a lot of sailing together," Asterix told him. The rest of the voyage to Egypt was uneventful. At last, one night, they saw a bright light ahead. "What's that on the horizon, Edifis?" asked Asterix. "It's the Tower of Pharos," Edifis told him. "It guides ships safely into harbour. We'll be in Alexandria tomorrow." Sure enough, when the sun rose next morning, the Gauls saw the impressive temples and palaces along the seafront of Alexandria, all the galleys drawn up in harbour, and the great Tower of Pharos itself. "As soon as we land," Edifis told his friends, "I'll take you to meet the Queen." In her magnificent palace, Queen Cleopatra was enjoying her favourite breakfast of pearls dissolved in vinegar. She had extravagant tastes. A slave girl was handing her a whole bowl of precious pearls to put in her golden cup. "Where are the pearl tongs for Osiris's sake?" asked Cleopatra crossly, swearing by the chief god of the ancient Egyptians. "You don't expect me to use my fingers, do you? Here, taster, get on with your job," she continued, handing her cup to the man who tasted everything before she ate and drank it, for fear of poison. "Very well, O Queen," said the taster. "Greedy pig," he thought to himself. "She's taken 4 pearls again. Oh, I do hate too much pearl in my vinegar." No sooner had Cleopatra drunk her heavily pearled vinegar than a servant came in, bowed low, and announced, "Edifis the architect craves the honour of an audience, your majesty." Next moment, Edifis was grovelling on the highly polished marble floor in front of the throne, while the Gauls, who never grovelled to anyone, looked around with interest. Dogmatix was particularly interested in a golden statue of a cat. "Grrr!" he growled fiercely. "Dogmatix, no! Sit!" Asterix ordered. "I warned you," he whispered to Obelix. "Meet my friends from Gaul, O Queen," said Edifis hastily. "A powerful magician and 2 brave warriors who've come to help me win your bet with Caesar." "Very well, but get on with it," snapped Cleopatra. There isn't much time left, and Caesar keeps needling me. If you succeed, there'll be gold all round. If not, the crocodiles. And I may as well warn you, Edifis, your arch-rival, the architect Artifice, isn't pleased that I chose you instead of him to build Caesar's palace. He'd love to see you end up inside a crocodile. You may go. Queen Cleopatra seems rather bad-tempered, said Asterix as they left. But she does have a pretty nose. Very pretty indeed, agreed Getafix. Edifis said he would take them back to his home. As they walked along, Obelix was still trying to work something out. What's an arch-rival? He asked. Someone who builds arches, I expect, said Asterix. They'd just reached a large house. He stopped to look at it. Someone who builds arches better than that, I should think, he added. Said Edifis, this is my house. I designed it myself. Oh, sorry, gulped Asterix, wishing he kept his big mouth shut. Because it wasn't just the arches that were all wonky in Edifis's house. The pillars leant in all directions, none of the windows were set at right angles, and the door didn't fit the door frame. Jammed again, muttered Edifis, trying to open it. I must have made a mistake in my plans somewhere. Let me give you a hand, said Obelix helpfully. Obelix, no! Shouted Asterix, but too late. Obelix had put his huge hand against the door and given it a little push. The door splintered and broke in half. The door frame sagged even worse than before. Asterix and Getafix looked sternly at Obelix, who was very red in the face. Don't worry, it's quite all right, said Edifis hastily. The door's much more use this way. I mean, we can get in and out now. Watch out for the steps, he said as they went upstairs. This was a useful warning. The staircase was broad, but the steps were all at different angles. I get the impression you really did need our help, Edifis, murmured the Druid. There was a study at the top of the stairs, with a little man squatting cross-legged on the floor, working on a scroll. This is where I work, said Edifis. Meet my faithful scribe Ex Libris. He speaks your language fluently. Actually, he speaks all modern languages, Latin, Greek, Celtic, etc., etc. Is it a good position, being a scribe? Getafix asked the little man. Oh, it's very comfortable, Ex Libris assured him. I'm sitting pretty. Well, squatting pretty, anyway. And how did you get to be a scribe? The Druid went on. I took a correspondence course, Ex Libris said. The ad for the course said anyone who could draw could write. And he held up the scroll to show them. Sure enough, it was all over picture language. And next moment a servant came in, spouting more of the same. The architect Artifice to see me? Show him in, said Edifis. I wonder what he wants. They were soon to find out. Artifice, a sinister character with a cunning look in his eye, came in. He was wearing a poison-green tunic and a bright yellow hat. Edifis, he said, I'll come straight to the point. Why don't we join forces and build Caesar's palace together? If we succeed before the deadline, we'll share the gold. If not, you can go to the crocodiles on your own. No need to give them 2 where 1 will do, and Cleopatra only said 1. Edifis didn't think much of this idea. He didn't approve of Artifice in any case. I refuse, he said proudly. I don't like your professional methods. You work your slaves to death. You're a cruel, two-faced twister. Get out of my house, he thundered. You'll be sorry for this, snarled Artifice on his way downstairs. I'll make sure Cleopatra loses her bet. You and your friends will be thrown to the crocodiles, and I hope they like the taste of you. Talk about a biting wit, said Asterix. Doesn't mince his words, does he? Agreed Obelix. Positively eaten up by hatred, said Getafix. Even the Egyptian scribe joined in. Artifice really showed his teeth, he said. Edifis didn't think any of this was particularly amusing. I wish you wouldn't use that sort of language, he said. It reminds me of crocodiles. Dogmatics, snapped Asterix suddenly. He'd spotted the little dog sniffing busily at the base of a pillar, leaning over sideways in case it was a tree. Dogmatics did love a nice tree. Crocodiles, muttered Edifis unhappily. Oh, well, let's think of something to take my mind off 'em. Let's go and visit the building site. It's just outside the city gates. I'll show you the way we build things around here. he said proudly. But Asterix had noticed dogmatics too late. The little dog sniffing had unbalanced the column. Next moment it crashed to the floor in several enormous pieces with a terrifying noise. "So that's the way you build things around here," Getafix couldn't help murmuring. The Gauls followed their host out to the banks of a river, a tributary of the Nile. "This is the building site," said Edifis. It's certainly an impressive sight," said Getafix. And it was. The river, the desert, and the palm trees stretched as far as the eye could see. Most impressive of all were the teams of building workers. Small men with black hair, wearing nothing but white loincloths, and toiling away in the bright Egyptian sunlight. There were 8 to a team, each team hauling ropes fixed to a heavy sledge and pulling a vast block of stone towards the foundations of the palace Edifis was to build. And each team had a foreman, cracking a whip to make the men go faster. "Are those poor men slaves?" asked Asterix in concern. "No, there's a slave shortage," sighed Edifis. "The slaves are so emancipated these days you just can't get hold of them. Those are free labourers." "Then why the whips?" asked Asterix. "We Egyptians always have whipping while we work," Edifis explained. He started humming. "Whipping while you work, you will never shirk. Tumty, 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 whipping while you work." Anyway, they take it in turns. "Watch this," he told the Gauls. Next moment a man climbed on a stone block and blew a horn. All the workers stopped pulling. One man from each team let go of his rope, took the foreman's whip, and swapped places with him. Then they went back on with their work, hauling on the ropes and cracking the whip. "Peculiar methods you have here," said Getafix the Druid. "Oh, no, this way everyone's happy," Edifis assured him. "Nothing like a little nip to get you going in the morning." But he was interrupted by the horn call again. "Ah, that's for the lentil break," he told the Gauls. Tea, of course, had not yet been invented except in China, but lentils were very popular in ancient Egypt. "Come over to my tent and have a look at the plans for the palace," Edifis suggested. Asterix was still worried about the whips, and pointed to 2 men who hadn't knocked off the lentils. One was straining to haul a great block of stone all by himself, although he obviously couldn't move it an inch. The other man was cracking the whip above his head. "Why aren't those 2 stopping?" Asterix asked. "They're doing overtime," Edifis explained. "They need the extra cash." Asterix decided that Obelix might be right for once, and the Egyptians were crazy, in which case he might as well give up worrying about them and their human rights. But as it happened, Edifis and the Gauls did have good reason to worry. During a lentil break, there was an unexpected visitor to the site. Edifis, the architect, climbed on a big block of stone and addressed the labourers at length in eloquent picture language. Whatever he was saying, it was obviously interesting, but the Egyptian workmen all started chattering busily away as Edifis went off with an evil chuckle, rubbing his hands in satisfaction. At the end of the lentil break, a man blew a particularly long and noisy horn signal, but no one went back to work. So he blew it again, and again. The 3rd time was once too often. He ended up with the horn twisted round his neck, which made it perfectly clear to everyone that the men had no intention of going back to work at all. Ex Libris the scribe hurried over to the tent where Edifis was showing the Gauls his plans, to tell the architect what was up. "Master," he exclaimed breathlessly, "the labourers won't go on with the job. I think someone has been stirring them up against you." "Artifice, you bet," said Edifis. He paced up and down the tent. "All these worries are positively blood-curdling," he complained. "By the time the crocodiles get me, I'll be quite uneatable." "All the better," Asterix pointed out. "Are you really so keen to make them a good meal?" "Of course," protested Edifis. "Those are sacred crocodiles. You can't just feed them any old thing." Obelix tapped his head again. "These Egyptians are crazy," he muttered. Edifis left the tent. "Well, let's see what's up," he said. The Egyptian workmen were still standing about in a crowd, and still not working. But now one of them was doing all the talking, while the others listened. He seemed to be making an important point. Edifis listened for a moment or so. "Just as I thought," he told the others. "They're asking for less again." "You mean more, don't you?" suggested Obelix. "No, it's nothing to do with wages. They're very well paid. They want less whipping. But if I reduce the whipping, they won't work so fast, and the palace will never be finished in time. Getafix decided it was time for him to take a hand. You and your whipping, he said testily, it's getting me down. This is no way to treat people, Edifis. Asterix, light me a good fire under that cauldron. I'll show you how to make men work. And undoing the bundle containing the secret ingredients he'd brought all the way from Gaul, Getafix set about brewing some magic potion. When it was ready, Obelix offered to taste it. No, not you, said Getafix sternly. You know perfectly well you fell into the cauldron when you were a baby, so you don't need any. Asterix, give these Egyptians a little demonstration. Asterix took a good swig of potion. Then, with the greatest of ease, he picked up a huge block of stone, more than 3 times his size, and tossed it lightly into the air. Obelix, who was quite a long way off by now, just stuck out one hand and caught it easily. The watching Egyptians were all amazed. It works like magic, said Edifis. That's right, the Druid agreed. Now tell your men to queue up, and I'll give everyone a dose of my magic potion. The building workers formed a queue consisting entirely of small men with black hair wearing white loincloths, except for the first man in it. A large man with a ginger moustache and pigtails, wearing a very large pair of blue and white striped breeches and a helmet. No, Obelix, said the Druid patiently. Oh, all right, sighed Obelix, walking away as Getafix got on with the job of ladling magic potion into the queue of Egyptians. Next, he said briskly. Next, next, next. As the queue moved on, up came a large man with a ginger moustache and pigtails, wearing a very large pair of blue and white striped breeches and an Egyptian headdress, and hiding a helmet behind his back. No, Obelix, said Getafix, finally losing his temper. Oh, all right, said Obelix again. However did he manage to penetrate my cunning disguise, he wondered as he walked away. Once all the building workers had drunk some potion, they found building the palace easy as pie. They no longer had to haul heavy blocks of stone on sledges. Now they could toss the stone blocks to each other as if they weighed nothing at all. They could carry them one-handed or on their heads and toss them up to the men building the palace walls, which were rising fast. And all the time they were singing and cracking cheerful jokes, although unfortunately the songs and jokes were all in picture language, unsuitable for translation here. Getting on nicely, said Asterix with satisfaction, as the palace began to take shape. He didn't notice little Dogmatics lapping up the last few drops of potion that had run out of the cauldron. But the huge, fierce Egyptian hound who came up ready to pick a fight with any other dog certainly noticed. Next moment he was running for his life, yelping in terror, and pursued by a tiny, terrifying scrap of white fur. The evil architect Edifis, hidden behind some rocks, watched in dismay as the walls and pillars rose before his eyes. The labourers were even starting on the roof. Curses, he muttered. These amazing foreign wizards will end up helping Edifis to win the bet. I must do something. Artifice's equally evil henchman, Crewcut, a sinister little man with a shaven head, was waiting at a distance, holding the horses which had brought them to the building site. Crewcut, called the architect. What is it, O Artifice, my master? Inquired the henchman. Listen, said Artifice. I know Edifis is expecting a consignment of stone to come down the Nile from the rustic backwoods of the country. At the rate work on the palace is going, they'll be needing it soon. Well, that stone must never reach the building site. Do you understand me, Crewcut? Here's gold to settle the business. I understand you, master, chuckled Crewcut. He took the bag of gold his master threw him, mounted one of the horses, and galloped upstream along the river bank. After a while he met the fleet of barges bringing stone to build the palace. Hailing the captain, he held an animated conversation with him in picture language, and the gold he offered soon overcame the man's scruples. Unload those stones, the captain ordered his men. They thought this a bit odd, since they hadn't reached the building site yet, but still they began unloading the blocks of stone from the barges and throwing them on the river bank. A furious yell from the captain interrupted them. Not on the bank, you fools, the other side! The bargees, natives of the rustic backwoods and none too bright, obeyed without question. Reckon Gaffer be crazy, they told each other. but bain't no use argufying with he. All the blocks of stone went into the river itself with a mighty splashing and sploshing. Back at the building site, work had been going ahead nicely, so when Asterix next looked round, he was surprised to see the workmen sitting about on a half-built palace doing nothing. "By two tartis, what's the matter now?" he asked. "Why have the labourers stopped work?" "They've run out of stone," Edifis explained. "I'm getting worried. The fleet that's supposed to be bringing more from the quarries in the south is late." Just then Ex Libris the scribe came running up. "Oh, Edifis, here comes the captain of the fleet," he said. "At last," cried Edifis in relief. But his face fell as the captain, a proud-looking, hawk-faced man with a gold headband and a handsome green and white loincloth, let fly with a whole string of picture language and held out a single small pebble. Edifis interpreted his picture language for the Gauls. "He says the quarries are worked out, and this pebble is all he could bring. And he says he wants his travelling expenses." Said Asterix thoughtfully. "You know, I don't think he's telling the truth." "Ooh, Asterix, can I make him talk?" asked Obelix. "Ooh, do let me make him talk." "All right, but not too hard," Asterix agreed. Obelix turned to the scribe Ex Libris. "How do you say talk in picture language?" he asked. Ex Libris told him. Obelix tried it out. His picture language would not have won any prizes in an art competition, but the captain of the fleet got a gist of it, and shook his finger fast, meaning no. Next moment, not just his finger, but the whole of him was being shaken. Obelix had picked him up bodily, and was shaking him with one hand, while he slapped his face with the other hand. The captain saw stars. His gold headband flew off, his mind went round in circles. He began talking very fast indeed. In fact, there was no stopping him. Ex Libris got quite breathless trying to keep up with the picture language as he interpreted. "He says Artifice paid him to throw his cargo into the Nile, and there's really still stone in the quarries, oh yes, lots of stone, and he'll be happy to go and fetch it, no extra charge, and please don't hit quite so hard, and he swears by Isis, Osiris and Serapis, and all the other gods of Egypt, never ever to do it again." At last Obelix dropped the half-stunned captain with a thud. "I still don't quite trust him," Asterix told Edifis. "I think Getafix, Obelix and I had better go back with him to fetch that stone, just to be on the safe side." "All right, but do hurry," said the architect anxiously. "Time's getting short." Before long, the three Gauls were all on board ship. "We shall soon be joining the Nile, and then we follow the river south, downstream," Getafix told his friends. Little did they know, however, that the infamous Artifice was hatching yet another evil plan. "Crewcut," he told his henchmen, "I've learnt those miracle-working foreigners have gone off to get more stone. They must not return. Now listen, this is what you have to do." Meanwhile, the fleet had reached the Nile, just as Getafix said, and was gliding down a majestic and sacred river, but not gliding nearly fast enough for the Gauls. "This is slow," complained Obelix. "Very slow," agreed Getafix. "Too slow," said Asterix. "I know what. Get all the boats over to the bank and fasten them firmly together with ropes." "Oh, goody," said Obelix. "A bit of exercise at last." Very soon he was running along the riverbank, towing the entire fleet behind him at high speed. It made the Egyptian boatmen feel quite seasick. "By two tartis," murmured Getafix. "That boy never ceases to surprise me, even though I do know he fell into a cauldron of magic potion when he was a baby." When night fell, they camped on the riverbank, never guessing that the cunning crewcut was hiding nearby, keeping watch and biding his time. The only thing that bothered Obelix was his dinner. Lentils again. "Not a single slice of boar," he grumbled. "Well, they can't blame me if I come over all weak and feeble." "Cheer up, Obelix," said the Druid. "Tomorrow we're going to visit the Sphinx and the pyramids. They're not far away, and they'll be well worth seeing." Even Obelix was a little tired next morning, after all that exercise, and no wild boar afterwards. But Getafix made him get up, and the Gauls set off to see the famous sights of ancient Egypt. The Sphinx, a mighty statue of a lion with a human head, was most impressive. It crouched on the desert sand, towering high into the air and dwarfing the souvenir stalls selling little models of it. "There," said Getafix. "Now what do you say? Wasn't it worth coming?" "It's stupendous, by Bellissima," gasped Asterix, swearing by an ancient Gaulish goddess. Obelix was lost for words, but Dogmatix wasn't. Looking at the lion body of the Sphinx, he decided it was the biggest cat he'd ever seen in his life, and growled fiercely. "Dogmatix? No," said Obelix. "You leave that poor pussy alone." Getafix was looking at some large stone slabs with portraits of Egyptians carved on them. The stone carver showed him a blank slab. "Oh, noble tourist," he suggested, "how would you like a souvenir portrait of yourself with the Sphinx?" "Oh, well, why not?" said the Druid, preening slightly. "It would look good in my hut at home." The stone carver placed him in a typical Egyptian pose. "Kindly present your profile, sir. Shoulders facing forward, and please don't move." "We'll have a look round while you get your picture carved," said Asterix, and he and Obelix went back for a closer look at the Sphinx. Obelix suddenly had an idea. "Bet you there's a good view up at the top," he said, and he began scrambling up one of the Sphinx's vast paws. "Now, Obelix, I'm sure you're not supposed to," shouted Asterix, but there was no stopping his friend now. Onwards and upwards he went. Even Obelix looked quite small as he climbed the mighty Sphinx. "Bother Asterix," he said to himself, as he reached the statue's enormous but perfectly formed nose. "He's always bossing me about. I knew it'd be all right." It wasn't. Next moment there was a mighty crack, and the Sphinx's entire nose broke off and fell to the ground. It hadn't been able to take Obelix's weight. Feeling very embarrassed, he hurried down to the sand where the broken nose lay. Dogmatix was already sniffing around it. "Well done, Obelix," said Asterix with heavy sarcasm. "Oh, very well done indeed." Perhaps we could stick it on again," suggested Obelix. "You're always breaking things," his friend continued crossly. "It's lucky no one saw us. The only thing to do is to bury that nose in the sand." They set to work, and soon the job was done. "No one will ever think of digging here," said Obelix, pleased with their efforts. "Dogmatix!" He had reckoned without Dogmatix, who'd been watching with interest, and began digging at once. Obelix called him to heel, and the two friends hurried off to find Getafix. "Come on, Getafix, we can't stick around here. I'll explain," said Asterix. "Explain? What for?" said Obelix. "No one's going to notice a little thing like that." "But my portrait isn't finished," protested Getafix, as Asterix dragged him away. Regretfully the stone carver watched him go. "Pity. It were a good likeness," he murmured, "especially the Sphinx." And then he looked up at the real Sphinx and uttered a yelp of dismay. "A Sphinx!" All the other souvenir sellers looked up too, chattering excitedly in picture language. Next moment the air was full of the sound of hammers and chisels as they knocked the noses off all their souvenir models. And if you ever go to Egypt and see the Sphinx, you will now know why it has no nose. Because sure enough, no one ever did dig that nose up again, which is a shame, for it was a very fine specimen of a nose, if not so beautiful as Cleopatra's. Hers, as we may have mentioned already, was a very pretty nose indeed. Soon the three Gauls reached the pyramids. As usual, Getafix was more than ready to supply his friends with useful information. "These pyramids," he said, "were built by the Egyptians as tombs for their pharaohs, and are among the wonders of the world." "Magnificent," said Asterix. "Give me a menu any day," said Obelix. He was fed up with sightseeing. "Obelix," said Getafix sternly, "from the summit of these pyramids, 20 centuries look down upon us." Just then a small, sinister figure emerged from one of the pyramids. It was our old acquaintance Crewcut, pretending to be a tourist guide. As he spent so much time lurking and hiding, the Gauls had never seen him before, so they had no idea that he was really Edifis, the evil architect's equally evil henchman. "Would you care to see round inside the pyramids, noble tourists?" he asked in oily tones. "Goodness me," said Getafix. I thought it was impossible to get into the tombs." "Fancy wanting to get into a tomb," muttered Obelix. "These Egyptians are crazy." "The fact is, thieves have already broken in," said Crucat, "though very few ever got out again. But of course," he added, bowing very low, "such noble visitors can trust me." "Well, then, we'll be happy to accept," said the Druid, following the evil Crucat. Obelix patted Dogmatix. "This is no place for little dogs," he said. "You wait here for us. If you're good, you'll get a nice bone. Sit, Dogmatix." Dogmatix sat, and Obelix followed the others into the pyramid. It was very dark inside, full of gloomy corridors, flights of steps and grave chambers built from vast slabs of stone. The Gauls had to carry lighted torches to see their way. Crucat went ahead with another torch. "Don't lose sight of me, or you'll never get out of this labyrinth alive, noble tourists," he called back, leading them further and further in. "Now, come in here," he said, standing aside to let them into a room containing 2 tall statues and several columns covered with interesting carvings. The walls were carved too. "This room boasts some magnificent hieroglyphics," he told the Gauls. And then, as they raised their torches to take a closer look, they suddenly heard the slam of the mighty stone slab which sealed the room, closing after them. Outside, the evil Crucat was cackling with glee at the success of his cunning ruse. "You will never get out of here alive, foreign devils," he shouted. "This tomb will be yours." Within a few minutes he was out of the pyramid, tossing away his torch, and passing the puzzled Dogmatix, who was still obediently sitting where Obelix had left him, thinking of the bone he would get for being good. "If they get out of that, by Isis," said Crucat, "I swear never to shave my head again." The Gauls could have kicked themselves for letting Crucat trick them. "This would never have happened inside a menhir," Obelix pointed out. But Getafix was not the Druid to stand about weeping and wailing. "Right, now to get out of here again," he said briskly. "For a start, we have to open this door. Obelix, listen carefully. This is a solemn moment. Taking everything into consideration, I am now, for the first time ever, going to give you some magic potion." "Honest?" said Obelix. "You really mean it?" "1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops," said the Druid, trickling them into Obelix's mouth from the tiny flask he always carried with him. "That should do the trick. Now, open that door." "Ooh, I say, I am glad I came inside this pyramid," said Obelix happily, smashing his way through the door as if it was made of paper. The heavy stone fell apart in chunks. The wind Obelix raised as he tore through the door and out the other side almost blew out the torches the others were holding. Next moment, Obelix looked back in round the doorframe again. "Not that I actually feel much difference between before and after the potion," he said. The Gauls were out of their dungeon now, but they were still lost inside the pyramid's intricate architecture. "We must find our way back along this network of corridors," said the Druid. "That will be the tricky part," agreed Asterix, while Obelix thought of his little dog left outside. Suppose they were really lost in here. What would Dogmatix do? Sure enough, several hours later the 3 Gauls were still no nearer to finding their way out. Exhausted, they sat down for a rest. "This is the 10th time we've fetched up in the same spot," said Getafix, looking round at the all-too-familiar walls. "Those pharaohs certainly had some good architects." "This is getting serious," said Asterix. "Very serious," agreed Obelix. "I'm beginning to feel hungry." Outside the pyramid, so was Dogmatix. He decided it was time to go looking for his master, and maybe get that bone. Yes, he'd waited long enough. He got up and raced in. Far inside, the Gauls were still gloomily discussing their situation. "Even my powers aren't strong enough to get us out of here," sighed Getafix. "I'm very much afraid this may be the end of our adventures by villainous." Villainous was yet another Gaulish god, by the way. "I'm only sorry for Edifis," said Asterix. "Without our help he'll end up inside a crocodile." "Well, I'm sorry for my poor little Dogmatix," said Obelix. "Aren't I Dogmatics?" he added, patting the little dog who had just arrived, panting happily at his feet. "Dogmatics!" shouted the others, doing a double-take. "Dogmatics!" "Yes, Dogmatics, what about it?" said Obelix defensively. "You're not going to be cross with me for bringing him, are you? Anyway, I didn't bring him, so there. He came all by himself." "Exactly," shouted Asterix. "He's found us thanks to his nose, which means he can find his way back out again." "By villainous, you're right," said Obelix. He patted the little dog again. "Dogmatics, if you help us out of here, you'll get a very big bone indeed." Dogmatics barked and immediately set off. Carrying their lighted torches, which didn't look as though they'd last much longer, the Gauls hurried after him. "You'll get 2 big bones," added Obelix, as they raced along a downward-sloping corridor. "Heaps and heaps of big bones," he finished happily, as Dogmatics led them unerringly out of the pyramid. "Obelix, I apologize," said Asterix solemnly. "You were quite right to bring your dog." "Sometimes I feel he understands every word I say," said Obelix, giving his pet a hug. Meanwhile, the evil Crucat had hurried off to the fleet and found the captain. "The foreigners have gone missing," he told him. "There's no need to continue your journey." As he spoke, a hand tapped him on the shoulder. He looked round. He couldn't believe his eyes. For behind him stood Asterix, Getafix, and Obelix. And not only had they not gone missing, they none of them looked at all pleased with him. "It's magic," gasped Crucat. "You're wizards! Only a Superman could ever find his way out of—" But he never finished his sentence, because Asterix had knocked him flying. And before long the boats were sailing peacefully back up the Nile, while Dogmatics happily tackled his reward of a huge heap of big bones. During the voyage, the Gauls stopped off only to see the sights at interesting places such as Luxor, where Obelix was very taken with the handsomely carved obelisks. He was missing his menhirs, and suggested taking an obelisk home as a souvenir. "Certainly not," said Getafix. "That thing in the middle of the village? It would just look silly. Needs a much bigger setting than our village square. Wouldn't look so bad in Lutetia, for instance." Lutetia was the name of the capital of Gaul, now known as Paris. "We shall never be in concord over this," said Obelix wistfully. By now, Crucat had arrived back in Alexandria, looking considerably the worse for wear, partly because of his stubbly head. As you may remember, he had sworn a vow never to shave it again if the Gauls got free. Now he had to report his failure to his master Edifis. "Those Gauls, master, they're wizards," he said. "They have superhuman powers. They've managed to get out of the labyrinth of the Great Pyramid." "That's amazing," said Edifis, hardly able to believe it. "Well, of all the more reason to find some way of stopping them. Crucat, Edifis must not build that palace. We must think." They thought. They thought for several days, while the stubble on Crucat's head grew longer and longer. Meanwhile, the Gauls finished their voyage and brought Edifis the stone he needed for his palace. The labourers, well dosed with magic potion, got back to work, while Getafix made some much-needed corrections to Edifis's plans. Everyone was very excited when Queen Cleopatra paid a visit to the building site to see how the palace was getting on. She arrived seated in state on her throne at the top of a flight of steps mounted on a vast platform on wheels, which was hauled along by a crowd of perspiring slaves. A mighty golden figure of the Sphinx rose behind her, and the throne itself was framed in a peacock fan. It was all most impressive, and even though she assured everyone she was only paying a quiet little visit incognito, of course the Gauls recognized her, and her pretty nose. It was so beautiful that they all blushed red with admiration. She was pleased with the way the palace was getting on. Edifis was not. "An idea! I need an idea," he said, pacing up and down, and looking savagely at his henchman Crucat, whose hair was really shaggy by now. "Help me, Crucat, and for the last time go and shave your head," he snarled. "Can't, master. I made this vow, see?" Crucat explained. Then suddenly inspiration struck. Edifis smote his brow. "I've got it! It's a piece of cake!" he exclaimed. In fact, it was a whole cake. He had a delicious layer cake made, with buttercream filling, and almonds and cherries and marshmallow goo, and lots of sticky icing and marzipan fruit decorations on top. It looked wonderful. Artifice gift-wrapped it in green with a pink bow, and handed it to his servant on a golden platter. "Take this parcel to Queen Cleopatra," he said. The Queen was reclining on silk cushions, stroking her pet leopard, when Artifice's servant arrived with a green and pink package. "A present?" she asked. "Good, bring it here. Oh, a cake," she said, unwrapping it. "And there's a note, too." She unrolled the scroll that had come with the cake and read it. It said, "In homage to the Queen of Queens from the 3 Gauls." "Edifis's friends! Oh, how sweet of them!" cried Cleopatra, dismissing the servant. She handed the present over to her Lord Chamberlain, telling him, "I'll have this cake for pudding tonight. I'll be on my own, only a quiet little supper. Just 40 dancers and dancing girls, 80 musicians, and 300 simple dishes." Cleopatra was not the only person looking forward to supper that night. When they knocked off work on the building site, Edifis, Asterix and Getafix found Obelix waiting for them in the architect's tent with some excellent news. "Supper's ready," he said, "and at last there's wild boar. It arrived this afternoon by galley." But no sooner had Edifis and his friends sat down to feast on the boar than 3 guards turned up announcing, "We've come to arrest the 3 Gauls by order of the Queen." Asterix, Obelix and Getafix had no idea why they were being arrested. "What do we do now?" Obelix wondered. "Shall we thump these guards?" he suggested hopefully. "Don't do anything at all," Edifis said anxiously. "If you resist Cleopatra, you're heading for trouble." When they were brought before Cleopatra, she was looking absolutely furious. "Ha! Gauls!" she spat. "Try to poison me with this cake, would you? You'll pay for this with your lives." "Cake?" asked Asterix, baffled. "What cake?" Then he saw it. There it stood on its golden platter, with one slice cut out of it, showing all the delicious layers of cake with buttercream filling and the almonds and cherries and marshmallow goo and the sticky icing and marzipan fruit decorations on top. But as you probably guessed, the evil Artifice had added an extra ingredient too. "Bring in my taster," said Cleopatra grimly, snapping her fingers. The taster was carried in on a litter. He was pale green in the face, groaning with the stomach cramps he was suffering. "He tasted a bit of that cake, and now look at him," said the Queen. "But it's all a mistake by 2 Tartars. We're innocent," Asterix protested. "I don't want to hear another word," said Cleopatra. "But," Asterix began. "If the Queen doesn't want to hear another word, then it's no good saying one, Asterix, for now," Getafix told him. "Take them away and give the sacred crocodiles their aperitif," Cleopatra ordered. "But why wouldn't you let us explain, Getafix?" asked Asterix as they were marched off. "I have an idea," the Druid said. "And besides, you can't argue with Cleopatra. She's got a foul temper. But such a pretty nose." He blushed all over again at the mere thought of it. He was getting as besotted with that nose as Julius Caesar himself. The 3 Gauls were taken to a dungeon which had a massive door reinforced with iron bars. "And to think there was wild boar for supper and we haven't even started it," said poor Obelix. But the Druid had a clever plan. "Asterix, hand me that jug of water," he said, as he took a little bag of herbs out of his pouch and tipped the herbs into the yellow jug. "What are you making, Getafix?" Asterix asked. "An antidote," said the Druid. "Lucky thing I always carry this little bag with me. Here, drink this." And he handed it to his friends. "What's an antidote?" asked Obelix, who'd never heard the word. "I'll tell you later," said Getafix. "Meanwhile, open this dungeon door, Obelix." "Stand back!" Obelix shouted to any guards who might be in the way. "We're coming out!" "Ho, ho, ho, ho!" chuckled the massive guard outside the door. "Coming out, are you? That's a good one! Ho, ho, ho!" There was a mighty crash as Obelix gave the door a tiny tap and pushed it over. It landed right on top of the guard, squashing him flat. "These Egyptians are crazy," said Obelix, shaking his head. "You tell them to get out of the way? I don't have the sense to move." "Never mind that," said Getafix briskly. "We're off to see Cleopatra again." Cleopatra had put the unfortunate incident of the poisoned cake out of her mind and was discussing art with her portrait carver. He was showing her the picture he'd just finished of herself, posed in the usual Egyptian sideways-on position. "Oh, not bad," she said. "But you know, I'm rather tired of seeing myself in profile. Couldn't you do me three-quarter face for once?" "Madam," said the portrait carver icily, "you know what I think of modern art. Rubbish, that's what it is." However, this art appreciation class was rudely interrupted. Very rudely indeed, so far as the two guards on duty at the door were concerned. Getafix, carrying the yellow jug of herbal mixture, just walked past them with a polite, "Excuse me," but Asterix slammed the first guard into one green marble pillar, while Obelix slammed the second guard into another. The terrified carver cowered behind his stone slab. The Queen was frightened too, believing the Gauls had come to assassinate her. But say what you like about Cleopatra, she was brave. She rose to her feet. "By Osiris, Gauls," she announced in ringing tones, "since you have sworn to destroy me, I shall show you how a queen can die." No, by two tarties, just listen to what we have to say for once," Asterix begged her. "I'm sure that cake's not poisoned, Your Majesty," said Getafix. "I thought it looked a very nice cake." "Oh, you did you?" said the Queen sarcastically. "Very well, then, you can eat it. Slaves, bring back that cake." There was silence for a few moments as the three friends munched away at the delicious layers of cake with buttercream filling, the almonds and cherries and marshmallow goo and the sticky icing and marzipan fruit decorations on top, not to mention the extra ingredient. Cleopatra watched, waiting for them to keel over and go green in the face. They didn't. "Yummy," said Obelix at last, indistinctly. "It's got almonds in it. I love almonds." "Ah, Your Majesty," said Getafix, "you can see that the cake isn't poisoned." "Then what's the matter with my taster?" asked the puzzled Queen. "Send for him, and I'll soon cure him," said the Druid. The taster was carried in. He was feeling as ill as ever. Getafix handed him the jug of herbal mixture. "Here, drink this and you'll feel better," he told the man. The taster drank it. Next moment he sat up. "I do feel better. Much better," he announced. His face had gone back to its normal colour. "Why, I feel fine," he continued, getting off the litter. "I do believe I'm hungry." "That cake had nothing to do with your taster's illness, O Queen," Getafix explained. "He just has a delicate stomach. It comes of eating too much rich food." Cleopatra could be generous as well as brave. "I have treated you unjustly, O Gauls," she said. "You shall go free. As for this taster whose stomach has caused me, the Queen of Queens, to make a mistake, I'll dismiss him." The taster looked very happy as he followed the Gauls out of the throne room. "The cake was poisoned, though, wasn't it?" said Asterix. "It had enough poison in it to do for a whole cohort of legionaries," said Getafix. "But luckily we took my antidote before eating it." "I say thank you very much," the taster said. "I found the job of taster very distasteful. It was poisoning my life. Well, I'm off. I really am hungry. Time for something tasty." "Let's get back to the building site," said Asterix. "We must find out who was responsible for this outrage." "Asterisk, what is an antidote?" asked Obelix. The two friends had quite forgotten their quarrel by now. But before Asterix could answer, little Dogmatix came racing to meet his master, jumped into his arms, and licked his face with enthusiasm. "Dogmatix, you nearly knocked me over," cried Obelix. Ex Libris the scribe appeared at the run too. "Thanks be to the sun god Ra, you're back," he gasped. "My master Edifis disappeared immediately after you were arrested. You must find him." Asterix thought for a moment. "Come on, Obelix," he said. "Let's go to see Edifis. I'll bet you anything he knows where Edifis is." They left Getafix to supervise the building of the palace in Edifis's absence, and soon the other two Gauls were making their way through the streets of Alexandria. Following directions Ex Libris had given them, they soon found his rival's house and knocked on the door. No one answered. "Open up, by Villainous, if you value your door," yelled Asterix. Crewcut opened it just a crack and put his head out. He still had to keep his vow, so his hair was really long by now, and he had to tie it back to keep it out of his eyes. "What's all this noise?" he began angrily. Then he recognized Asterix and Obelix, and went almost as green in the face as the taster after eating the poisoned cake. He stammered. Yes, the Gauls, Asterix agreed. And we want to see your master Edifis. I'll just see if he's in, faltered the henchman. Good idea, said Obelix, taking him by the scruff of the neck. We'll come with you. Propelled by Obelix's huge hand, Crucut arrived in his master's study very fast indeed. Bosh, someone to see you, he announced. Edifis dropped the newspaper he'd been reading. It was the latest edition of the Daily Nile. You, he gasped in amazement and alarm. But didn't Cleopatra throw you for the crock of... Then, realizing what he'd said, he clamped his hands over his mouth, but too late. That's a confession, said Asterix, pointing an accusing finger. So it was you who sent Cleopatra the poisoned cake. Cake? Oh, cake, stammered the wretched Edifis. No, it's all a mistake. Just a mistake. I've never heard of any cakes, never heard of any crocodiles. Hoorah! You're going to tell us where to find Edifis, said Asterix. Never, said the villainous Edifis defiantly. Nothing in the world will ever make us talk, will it, Crucut? Oh, yes, it will, said Crucut, trembling all over. I'd much rather talk. You'll find Edifis down in the cellar, hidden in a sarcophagus. Coward, snapped his master. Yes, boss, Crucut agreed meekly. I'll guard this precious couple, Obelix, said Asterix. You go down to the cellar to find the sarcophagus. Right, said Obelix, disappearing down the cellar steps. A little later he was back. Asterix, what is a sarcophagus? He inquired. Oh, a big, heavy box. Very heavy, Asterix told him. Obelix went off again, and soon came back, balancing an enormous, intricately painted mummy case on the palm of one hand. Would this be it, Asterix? He asked doubtfully. It's the only big box I could find down there, but it's not at all heavy. That must be it, Obelix, his friend assured him. It's just that you're so strong you don't feel a weight the same way other people do. There was a heavily bandaged figure inside. Now all we have to do is unwrap this, said Asterix. Ooh, let me have a go, begged Obelix. It's like playing pass the parcel. And he rapidly unwound yards and yards of muslin bandage, until at last Edifis was revealed, safe and sound, but giddy from being rolled round and round on the floor as he was unwrapped. Are you all right? Asterix asked anxiously. Not bad. A little dizzy, said Edifis. Poor old Edifis, said Obelix. It must be on account of his sufferings. Edifis realized he had lost. I give in, he said. I hope to stop you finishing the palace, but I see it's no good. No hard feelings, eh? No hard feelings, agreed Asterix, who didn't trust him an inch. And to prove it, we'll take you and Crucut along with us. We've got a job for you. Soon afterwards, Edifis and Crucut were hauling a massive block of stone uphill towards the palace, without the benefit of any magic potion, of course. Meanwhile, Julius Caesar had decided to pay the Queen a visit. Ave, Cleopatra, he greeted her. How's the palace going? Time will soon be up. Ave, Caesar, said the Queen. It's going along nicely, thanks, Julius. We'll soon be able to have a little palace warming party. Caesar didn't much like the sound of that. Could he actually be about to lose his bet? It was unthinkable. He strode off to his own quarters. A legionary on guard snapped to attention. Ave, Caesar, said the soldier. Ave, legionary, replied Caesar. Go and find Mint Julep, my Egyptian spy. Mint Julep the spy was a slim figure in a very smart red loincloth, a real smoothie. He'd picked up some Roman habits and saluted Caesar with a very correct Ave. Ave, Mint Julep, replied Caesar gloomily. Listen, I look like losing face with Cleopatra. Everyone told me Edifis the architect was a nitwit, hopeless at his job, and now it seems the palace will be ready on time. I want you to go to the building site and see what's up. When Mint Julep arrived at the building site, he could see just what was up. Almost all of the palace was. However, he had a plan. He disguised himself in a workman's loincloth, and felt sure no one would recognize him. He went up to Asterix.
I'm only a light labourer, but I don't mind heavy work. Will you take me on? He asked.
Oh, yes, we can always do with workmen. Get in that queue, said Asterix. The queue, of course, was for the workman's daily dose of potion. Somehow Edifis and Cleopatra had managed to join it. No magic potion for those two, of course, said Asterix, spotting them. Oh, of course not, agreed Getafix. The two villains glared furiously. Foiled again. Meanwhile, Mint Julep was wondering what on earth could be going on. No foreman, no whips. And what was this stuff in the cauldron being ladled out by the white-bearded old gentleman? His turn soon came. It tasted rather odd, he thought. But then the horn signal for work to start was blown. To his amazement, Mint Julep saw a lame old Egyptian leaning on a crutch pick up a great block of stone with one hand. Could it be something to do with that strange drink? He decided to have a go, and discovered his guess was right. Even though he was so small and light, he could easily hold one of the great stone blocks above his head. "By Apis!" he exclaimed, invoking yet another of the many Egyptian gods. And next moment he was running back to Alexandria like the wind. "Aye, where's he off to?" said Asterix, startled by the new recruit's sudden departure. "Never mind, there are plenty more where he came from," said Getafix. Back in Alexandria, Mint Julep went straight off to report. "There are amazing things going on at that site, O Caesar," he said excitedly. "The labourers drink a magic potion, which gives them enormous strength. It enables them to pick up heavy loads as if they were feathers. I drank some of it myself." "It occurs to me, Mint Julep," remarked his employer, "that you may have drunk something else, too." "So you don't believe me, O Caesar?" said the spy. "Well, I may be a weak, puny, delicate physical specimen, but I bet I can beat the strongest man in your bodyguard." "You do? Right. You're superfluous. Come and put this fellow in his place," said Caesar, snapping his fingers. Legionary Superfluous was enormous, built like an extremely fit barrel, all muscle and no fat. He hurried to obey his commander, chuckling happily to himself at the thought of thumping the slim little Egyptian. Mint Julep put out one languid fist and thumped Superfluous instead. His chuckles died away as he rose to the ceiling, crashed his head against it, and fell to the floor, stunned. Said Caesar. He waved a dismissive hand. "All right, off you go. Superfluous by name, superfluous by nature." Two other legionaries, as surprised as their comrade, carted him away. "So, you weren't lying, Mint Julep," said Caesar thoughtfully. "Yet I know only one man who can brew such a potion, and he's a druid who lives a long way off, in Gaul." "A Gaulish druid," said Mint Julep. "Hang on a minute, O Caesar. As it happens, there are some Gauls on the building site. 3 of them." "What?" exclaimed Caesar, leaping to his feet. "You don't mean an old druid with a white beard, a cunning little warrior, and a great fat oaf?" "That's them, O Caesar," Mint Julep confirmed. "Asterix, Obelix, and Getafix," muttered Caesar furiously, striding up and down. "The invincible Gauls! They can perform any kind of miracle. I must do something." And he did. Next day, in the pale light of dawn, an Egyptian cockerel crew. It crowed in picture language, of course, but it sounded like any other cock-a-doodle-doo. Soon afterwards, on the building site, Ex Libris hurried to wake up Edifis and the Gauls. "Master," he panted, "come and take a look. There are some strange goings-on. The labourers haven't arrived for work. There's no one here but our prisoners, Edifis and Cleopatra, chained to that rock." "Go and find out what's happening," Edifis told the scribe. Ex Libris set off at his usual run. He was soon back. "The site is surrounded by Roman soldiers," he reported, "and they're not letting our workmen through." Turning to look, Edifis and the Gauls saw an extremely large Roman captain looming over them. "In the name of Caesar," he proclaimed, "we are some Gaulish troublemakers hiding on this building site. They must surrender, or we attack." "Never," cried Asterix, striking up an ancient Gaulish war song. "We don't want to fight, but by Tutatis if we do. We've got the stones, we've got the men, we've got the druid too." "You be sorry for this, by Jupiter," snarled Captain Opera Chorus as he marched away. Edifis was very worried. "What do we do now, by Isis?" he asked. "We build our fortifications by villainous," said Asterix, all fired up. "You're right, by bellissima," said Getafix. Very soon the Gauls are racing about, carrying great blocks of stone. Finally Asterix breathed a sigh of relief. "Good, that completes our fortifications," he said. To Edifis, the fortifications looked like a hastily assembled rough stone wall only 2 blocks high. He ventured, "do you think they're enough to keep out the Romans?" No one had time to answer him. "Here come the Romans," said Asterix. Obelix rubbed his hands with glee as Caesar's troops advanced in an oblong formation. They were employing the formidable military manoeuvre known as the tortoise. This meant that the men at the front of the oblong held their shields in front of them, the men at the sides held their shields to the sides of them, and the men in the middle held their shields above their heads. The idea was that no weapon could penetrate the metal shell of this military tortoise. They hadn't reckoned with Asterix and Obelix, who hurled block after block of stone right into the middle of the formation, crashing through the shields. The legionaries dropped their weapons and retreated, employing the useful military manoeuvre known as the hare. This meant running for dear life. Eventually they reassembled. Captain Opera Chorus, rather red in the face, addressed his men. He said. "So that didn't work? Right, we attack from all sides at once. Advance!" "But we've only just retreated," protested one legionary. "If we advance, we'll be driven into the Nile," said another. "We'll be annihilated," said a third. "One more pun like that and I desert right here in the desert," said a fourth. This was too much. The 5th man thumped him. "Oh, goody, here they come again," said Obelix, as the Romans prepared for another attack. Asterix saw that they were now aiming to attack on 2 fronts at once. He ran off to deal with half the enemy, shouting, "Go round the other side and drive them back there, Obelix." "We're on our way," Obelix yelled back. By we, he meant himself and Dogmatics. Very soon, Asterix was thumping Romans on the south side of the fortifications, and Obelix was thumping them on the north side. The unfortunate legionaries could put up very little resistance. "But I've been driven back once already," protested a legionary as Asterix grabbed his ankle, ready to chuck him off the wall. "Let go!" "Here's one that got in," shouted Obelix, carrying one soldier as he pursued another. I'm going, squealed his quarry, trying to get away. Finally the onslaught was over. A battered legionary reported back to Captain Opera Chorus. "They drove us off, but a few men did manage to get inside the fortifications." "Victory!" yelled Opera Chorus hopefully. Over-hopefully, in fact, because next moment he saw a small party of men, most of them minus helmets and bits of uniform, all of them plus black eyes and bumps and bruises, staggering away from the palace. "We're the ones who managed to get inside the fortifications," panted their leader. "But the Gauls were very nice, really. They let us out again, without hitting too hard." "Oh, did they?" said Captain Opera Chorus grimly. He was quite purple in the face with fury by now. "If that's the way they want it, we'll bombard them, so there!" Edifis, Ex Libris, and the Gauls watched from the fortifications as a mighty catapult was wheeled up. "Look," said Asterix, "long-range guided missiles." "If they miss, I'll be surprised," said Getafix, rather concerned. Sure enough, a few moments later the catapult was hurling great chunks of rock at the palace. They scored several direct hits. "My lovely palace!" wailed Edifis. "All our work going down the drain." "We'd better let Cleopatra know," Getafix decided. "She must have enough influence over this Caesar to get this attack stopped. I mean, he's cheating." "Good idea," said Edifis. "Ex Libris, write the Queen a message." "And Dogmatics can carry it," said Obelix. "Dogmatics? He's only a puppy," said Asterix. "Maybe, but he's very intelligent," protested Obelix, tying the piece of papyrus with the message to the little dog's back. "Go on, Dogmatics. Seek. Cleopatra, seek." Dogmatics just stood there looking puzzled, trying to work out what Obelix wanted. "I told you he was too young to understand," said Asterix. "Too young?" said Obelix indignantly. "A little dog who can beg so nicely and all." There, Obelix, don't be cross," said Asterix, seeing his friend was really upset. "I was only teasing. I'll show him the way myself." "Fancy saying my dog's no good," said Obelix, walking off in a huff. "Quick, Getafix, give me a good swig of magic potion while Obelix isn't looking," said Asterix. And he took some potion, snatched up Dogmatics, jumped over the fortifications with him, and was on his way. Obelix, who was sulking, never noticed.
"Watch out! One of the besieged men is trying to break out!"
cried a Roman soldier, as Asterix, tanked up with magic potion, barged his way through the enemy, sending helmets, spears, and the legionaries they belonged to flying. Before long he'd reached Cleopatra's palace. "You wanted to see me, old Gaul?" asked the Queen. "Yes, O Cleopatra. My little dog has a message for you," said Asterix, untying the papyrus from Dogmatic's back. The Queen bent to pat him. "Oh, isn't he sweet?" she said. "Someone bring a bone for this little dog." Then she read the message. "By Isis, this will never do," she exclaimed. "Julius Caesar isn't playing fair. You may go, Gaul. I'll see to this." She marched off, looking very determined. Asterix just gave Dogmatix time to enjoy his bone, after the Queen's new taster had passed it as wholesome, of course, and then they were on their way to the building site.
"Watch out! One of the besieged men is trying to break in again!"
cried the same Roman soldiers before, as Asterix barged his way back through the enemy, sending helmets, spears, and legionaries flying yet again. "Here's Dogmatic's back, Obelix," he told his friend. "He did his job perfectly." Obelix, who'd been sulking the whole time, didn't even realize that Asterix had gone too. "Here you are, see? I told you my dog could do it," he said proudly. "I just hope the Queen acts quickly," said Edifis anxiously. "The Roman missiles are destroying my palace." Sure enough, the situation was desperate. And in the camp of the besieging army, Opera Chorus was proudly showing Caesar his good work. "Here you are, O Caesar! Even if you don't capture those Gauls, the palace will be destroyed." "Excellent, Opera Chorus, excellent," said Caesar approvingly. Someone coughed nervously behind the two men. They turned to see a small legionary.
"Ave, Caesar. Someone wants to speak to you," he said timidly. "I'm a busy man," snapped Caesar. "Who is it?"
Next moment he saw, and heard too, for with a tremendous blowing of trumpets and beating of drums, Cleopatra rolled up in state on a ceremonial platform hauled by crowds of slaves. Dancing girls playing tambourines went ahead of the platform. Egyptian soldiers with bristling spears marched behind it. Even Cleopatra's pet leopard was there, straining at its leash to get at the Romans. It was an impressive sight. Furthermore, Caesar could see that Cleopatra was in a very bad mood indeed.
My dear Queen," he stammered.
Cleopatra rose to her feet in awesome majesty and a filthy temper.
"That's enough of that,"
she snarled. Then she really let fly.
"When I heard what was happening, I hurried out of the palace at once. I didn't even stop to change. When you make a bet, you must play fair. I had a perfect right to call in the Gauls, and I'll show you Egyptians can build beautiful palaces, and I absolutely insist that the Romans leave the builders in peace and repair all the damage they've been doing before leaving, and I call it a crying shame, and I—"
Here she finally had to pause for breath, and Caesar managed to get a word in edgeways.
All right. Don't go on about it so,"
he begged, both looking and feeling miserable.
"I'm sorry, I really am. I'll do as you want." "I should think so, too,"
said Cleopatra. And her platform rolled majestically away again, accompanied by the drums, trumpets, dancing girls, soldiers, and pet leopard, leaving Caesar and Captain Opera Chorus feeling all weak and trembling. Now what do we do?" Opera Chorus ventured to ask. Caesar turned furiously on him.
"We raise the siege and repair the damage you've done, idiot," he yelled, and as Opera Chorus shot off with a terrified "Ove" to carry out his orders, Caesar thought to himself, "After all, I wouldn't want Cleopatra to turn her nose up at me." In case we forgot to mention it before, Cleopatra did have a very pretty nose.
From inside their fortifications, the Gauls saw what happened next.
"Look, the Romans are raising the siege by villainous," cried Getafix.
"Victory by villainous," Asterix rejoiced. "And all thanks to Dogmatix," said Obelix, patting his dog proudly. Obeying Caesar's orders, the Roman legionaries were soon harnessed to the sledges, hauling blocks of stone to the palace. "First they knock it down, now they're helping to repair it," said Asterix with satisfaction. "These Romans are crazy," Obelix agreed. Only a few days later the palace was finished. Edifis, accompanied by his Gaulish friends, went to tell Cleopatra that he had won her bet for her. "Oh, Queen, the palace is finished, by the date you agreed with Caesar," he said, bowing low. Queen Cleopatra sat in state on her throne to receive him, wearing a magnificent purple cloak with an ermine collar. She was very pleased. "You have kept your promise, Edifis, and I will keep mine," she said graciously. Turning to her slave, she added, "Cover him with gold." Edifis stayed kneeling before the queen, while her slaves poured golden coins over him from vast jars until he was entirely covered. He was not a very large man, but he carefully kept his bottom raised as high in the air as possible, so it took quite a lot of gold to cover him entirely. "Tomorrow I shall invite Caesar on board my state barge," announced Cleopatra, "and we'll go down the sacred river to the palace, which I shall offer him as proof that my people are not decadent." "So there," said Edifis from inside his heap of gold. Next day, the Gauls and Edifis waited in front of the palace as Cleopatra's barge, a magnificent vessel with a handsome red sail, and dozens of oarsmen drew up outside. "Not a bad palace, is it?" commented Edifis. Indeed it wasn't. You reached it up a splendid flight of steps, with 2 statues of sphinxes at the bottom, and 2 statues of men on prancing horses at the top. And thanks to Getafix, all the lines and angles were straight, so nothing would collapse in a hurry, except, of course, the ceremonial ribbons slung across the entrance. Edifis welcomed Caesar and Cleopatra, and offered the Roman commander a pair of scissors on a red velvet cushion with gold tassels. "For you to cut the ribbon, O Caesar," he said. But Caesar turned to Cleopatra. "O loveliest of queens, yours is the honour of cutting the ribbon, which proves that I have lost my bet by Jupiter," he said. "I yield with a good grace before so much grace." So the 2 great leaders made up their quarrel, although Cleopatra couldn't resist asking Caesar, "Now, who knows best?" "What a pretty nose," sighed Asterix. The crowds of Egyptians acclaimed their queen with shouts of "Ra, Ra, Ra" as she graciously cut the ribbon. Ra, as you will remember, was the name of the Egyptian sun god. Then there was a banquet for 14,000 guests inside the palace. Cleopatra had been going to ask 13,000, but Egyptians are superstitious. Even Artifice was forgiven and invited to the feast. There were all sorts of delicious things to eat, including imported wild boar for Obelix. "You've saved my life and taught me how to do my job. My gold is yours," Edifis generously told the Gauls. No, my dear fellow, it was a pleasure," said Getafix. What are you planning now?" "Well, I'm friends with Artifice again, and we're going to form a company to build pyramids," said the architect. After the banquet, the Gauls went to see the Queen. "Our work is finished, and we have come to say goodbye," said Asterix. "That nose," thought Getafix, entranced. "You have performed miracles, Gauls, and you are entitled to all the gratitude that I, the Queen of Queens, can offer," said Cleopatra. "Oh, Druid, I am making you a present of these precious manuscripts from the Library of Alexandria." Getafix was overwhelmed. Your Majesty is too charming. I mean, too kind, by villainous," he stammered. "It seems very little in return for all the help you've given me," said the Queen. "I don't know how to thank you." "Always at your service," said Asterix gallantly. "And if you ever need anything else built in Egypt, say a canal between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, because that might be useful, come to think of it," he suggested, "well, just send for someone from our great country of Gaul by Teutatis." Cleopatra lent the Gauls her own barge to take them home, and they enjoyed a luxury cruise lasting several weeks, complete with musicians and dancing girls to entertain them, ample supplies of wild boar and slaves to cook it, and plenty of bones for Dogmatix, who had certainly proved his worth. "All we need is a nice fight with the pirates," said Obelix wistfully, leaning over the rail. "I wonder if we'll meet them again, Asterix." "I don't know, Obelix," said his friend. "I get a funny feeling they're not far away." They weren't. The pirate captain was sitting at an oar down in the hold, grumbling away to his wooden-legged first mate. "Fancy having to take a menial job like this. But we had to have some money to pay for the last boat. As soon as I can put down a deposit on another one, I'm going to look for those confounded Gauls." It was just as well for his peace of mind. He didn't know he and his crew were actually rowing the Gauls home.
And one fine spring day, the royal barge was sighted by a little boy playing outside the Gaulish village. He raced home shouting, "A sail! A sail! Asterix, Obelix and Getafix are back!" The villagers came crowding out to look. "I will now compose an ode of welcome," announced Cacophonix the bard. The villagers ran for their lives, leaving fully automatics to grab the bard and gag him, so that he couldn't sing and spoil the welcome home banquet. There was lots of wild boar and barley beer. The whole village listened as the travellers told their story. "And it was all thanks to dogmatics," Obelix finished. So for the next few days, everyone was happy. That is, until Chief Vital Statistics paid a visit to the menhir quarry and discovered Obelix busy carving his menhirs into the shape of Egyptian obelisks. As a patriotic Gaul, he was really shocked. "No," he said firmly, "I can't be doing with these newfangled designs from foreign parts. Let them import an obelisk and stand it in Lutetia for all I care. Who knows, the Britons might even import one to Londinium and call it something fancy, like Cleopatra's Needle. But here in Armorica, let's keep things Gaulish." And so they did.